Table Space asked me to do this little talk about working from home. You've been hearing a lot about it. I'm sure you've been consuming an endless amount of information about it, as everyone's just consuming a lot more than normal, which is already a lot. I'm going to give some background about who I am, why I'm even talking about this, where I come from, and then we're going to talk about, I'm just going to sort of explain what it means to do long-term work from home, because everyone's sort of still settling in, and right now there's a lot of new happening. But if this continues for weeks or possibly months, then you have to sort of figure out what it's like in your day-to-day, which is not being spoken about a lot. So I'll start by, so I run a design agency here in Winnipeg called Luscious. We all work from home. Before that, I was on my own. I was a solopreneur. And I worked from home for 10 years by myself. I had no staff, no employees, no partner. It was just me working from home by myself. So I'm very much used to that. So the first thing I'll point out is this is not a traditional work from home environment. And that really needs to be identified because it changes a lot of the conversation. A lot of the advice I can give you what it meant for me to work from home simply doesn't apply anymore. This is more trapped at home. You are stuck there. You don't have any choice. You're sort of forced to work without always having all the prep and the experience you would sort of have in these scenarios. So it's a very crunched, awkward environment. And so some of the advice doesn't quite apply in the same way. Normally, when people work from home, there's actually an added sense of freedom to that, right? I can do my own schedule. I can organize my time when I want. I can go to a yoga class, a spin class, or whatever. I can go do my groceries. I can go to the doctor. And you have a lot of freedom that comes with that, which is one of the biggest benefits of working from home and why people promote it so much. That doesn't exist right now. You are forced to do this, whether you like it or not, without any sort of relief, possibly with your family or your children or other people walking around or interrupting you, or your partner is working from, or your roommate or housemate is working from home as well. So you have all these things that make it a non-traditional work from home environment. And that means that some things just change. If you're watching this, it's probably because you like table space as much as our company does. And so that was an escape for you. You would go there to work, which meant that you were already able to work on your own and you already had a bunch of the skill sets in place, but you still needed a place to go that wasn't in your house. Perhaps you just needed to not feel like you were working, perhaps needed an environment, who knows? That's also gone. So that's what we're trying to identify is what does it look like in the long term after you've been doing this for a while and you're sort of trying to figure out your rhythm. The first couple of days you do anything, you have no idea what's normal. There is no norm, right? If you talk to people who work from home, even our company, which is for the most part, we're like, yeah, nothing much changed, kind of the same thing, astonishingly, because we're still working on the same work, doing the same kind of stuff, interacting the same way. That's because we have a bunch of infrastructure to make that work. And even then, within our own company, we're like, well, like my husband or my wife is at home and there's kids at home now. So even then things change. So what we want to talk about here is what it sort of looks like in the long term. And in general, the biggest piece of advice is you need to trust what's working for you and you need to be self-critical of when things aren't working. As a good example, when I first started working from home in 2005, I would go to a restaurant in Osborne Village and I would take my laptop and headphones and they would literally serve me coffee and then ask me every half an hour if I needed anything. And I got to know the staff there and I would work from a restaurant. I had an office at home. I had wonderful, caring parents who were supportive. I had a great office at home. I still needed to get away, right? I don't need that anymore. And the reason is because this is a conditioned environment. I conditioned myself to feel comfortable being by myself, to finding different ways to interact. I would go out, I would do all these different things, right? You have to find a way to honestly condition yourself for what works for you. When I first started working from home, I would put pants on. Like I would put jeans on and I would get dressed and I would have a rhythm and a pattern for what I had to do because that was really important for identifying that I was at work. Now I wear pajamas. I have work pajamas. I have work sweaters. This is one of my many work hoodies I have. I know exactly what I want when I have endless t-shirts and sweaters and sweatpants, and I have a pair of shoes that are runners that I just wear at home, right? That's because that's what works for me, and I conditioned myself and my environment to work for that. So that's the first big thing, is you have to slowly condition yourself for what you need at home. That is subject to your environment, to who else is around, to the kind of work you do, to whether you're actually working as part of a team or individual. I'll touch on both of those because they're different scenarios. And so that's the first thing. It will take you time to condition yourself to working from home. And the reason I talk about being self-aware is because you will inherently pick up some bad habits and you need to call yourself on them. I would not recommend asking your significant other or your person or your friend at home or whoever you're possibly at home with, if you have someone in your house with you, from pointing those out. That will not go well. You need to sort of say, okay, what's really getting in the way and what's causing me problems, and how can I fix it? And the truth is, no, you can read as many articles and listen to as many of these talks as you like. They won't answer that question for you. You have to sort of figure out what your bad habits are. And you can have things that will be bad habits for others that won't be bad habits for you. You know, for some people, they really like sitting on a couch, and for some people, they're like, no, I can't. For me, the idea of working on from your bed is just insane. I don't get it. I would never do it. And that's because I find that having that environment being mixed for more than one thing is bad. You know, the bed is meant for certain things, sleep and otherwise. It is not meant for work. And if you bring your laptop to bed, I think that's a bad idea. I ruled that out a long time ago. You have to figure out what works for you, and not just on, I'm getting some work done on the side, but this is my day job. So that's the part about conditioning. You will eventually figure out what your patterns are, and you'll work towards those. And the other thing is that you have to learn how to trust your own schedule and your own rhythm. You don't have a structure of a 9 to 5 or whenever your normal day job is, okay? And even if your work is saying, well, we're going to keep it at 9 to 5, that structure will lapse over time. It will loosen. It will not be maintained. Only the most rigid people will enforce a really weird, strict environment. Most of them will loosen over time. And if they don't loosen it, the people working from home will do it themselves anyway, because people over time go to what is comfortable. And without an office space, you will tend to still follow that pattern. You will follow your own pattern, right? And so if you are in the position to trust that pattern, make use of it, you know, especially in these weird scenarios. It might be that your morning is dedicated to spending time with your children because you're trading off with a significant other. And so that's how your schedule works. And we'll talk about ways to deal with that if you like. So trusting your own schedule and identifying is a big part of this, because there will be patterns and habits that will change over time, and you got to sort of assess them and figure out what works. At the same time, everyone around you is doing the same thing. You're ahead of the game if you can be aware of that's happening. So that's sort of the basics in terms of what it looks like long term. Those patterns change. I changed my patterns. You got to sort of figure out what works for you with all the different sort of variables that are affecting you. So that's sort of the basics. I'll talk briefly about what it means to work individually. You're going to figure out your own thing. Obviously, there is endless examples of online like classes you can take and online workouts and all those things that you did before. I have a friend who's starting a virtual brunch thing. He's encouraging everyone to do brunches on Sunday and virtual, and everyone eats like the same meal. So there's different things that are there. You're probably chatting with your friends more. You're probably actually going to connect with some people more than you did before, because there's inherent, people are making time for that kind of connection, okay? So when you're by yourself, if particular you are someone who is working by yourself and you're a solopreneur, which I imagine is a larger percentage of the people at Table Space who are sort of like 1 or 2 person teams. If you are a 1 person team, you might have already been working from home a little bit. For every individual, the hardest part, doesn't matter who you are, is the loneliness. And what that means for you is different things. For some people, they can spend more time with their dog. They actually don't like going out. They hated going to the office. There are people who will thrive in this environment. If you're one of those people, fantastic, right? Take advantage of it and enjoy this weird environment, as messed up as it is to say, and take advantage of what's there and refine it and maybe take that moving forward. For the people who find this very, very challenging, in that case, you have to find the different ways to tackle that loneliness. And I don't know exactly what that looks like for you and how you normally solve loneliness. And you're going to try to find comparables, but don't try to mimic it. And the advice I always use is when people go and travel to a completely different country, you go to somewhere in the Middle East, you go to Europe, you go to, anywhere else, and you try to take your norms with you. So you're like, you go to Europe and all of a sudden you want them to behave like North America, and you are really rigid about that. That tends to fail, right? It tends to go really poorly because you just don't fit in, and the rest of the country is operating one way and you're operating a different way, and you look like the weird, quote unquote, like ignorant, tourist. The same thing works in this scenario. If you try to bring all your old habits and all your old patterns and try to replicate what used to work in person in the exact same way, it won't work. So you have to sort of figure out how to deal with your loneliness or your isolation in the way that makes sense for you, because it will be different for everyone, and you cannot just directly replicate what was there before. You can find a comparable, and you'll also be okay with saying, like, you know what, it really worked for me to go for coffee with a friend, but honestly, talking to this person over video, I just hate it. Well, then you gotta take care of yourself and just pause that for now, okay? You have an excuse. Everyone has a big, giant excuse to change something in their lives if you want to. And those also affect how productive you are at work or how comfortable you are working from home, because they all impact it, right? So going back to my original point, this is trapped at home. This is not traditional worked at home. I think that's the most part on the individual side. I'll speak briefly to working in teams. I'm not going to speak to teams that are already set to deal with this, because like I said, my team set up to deal with this. Not a lot has changed. We already had a very well-tuned Slack system set up. We have all our tools for communicating online. We already had all these things in place. For the people who are being thrown into this, it's important to acknowledge you probably don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with this properly. Your managers or your staff were not expecting this. They are not prepared for this. And you're going to get a lot of advice on what to set up and what works. I would recommend picking now is the time to sort of switch to a digital infrastructure, because you're forced to anyways, in whatever form that works. But that's very specific to what you and your team are doing. The one thing I will say is, whenever you don't have an office, the main thing that's missing is that inherent casual communication, the water cooler talk, the pass by your office, whatever that may be. That's gone. And some people really need that. Whenever we're hiring, one of the first questions is, do you really like an office environment? And if they say yes, that's like a deal breaker. We actually just don't consider that person for the job anymore. That's how based around work from home we are. In that scenario, that's not what this is. So there are people who will need that communication and that interaction, and it won't be there. So find other ways to make that happen. And the best advice is to over communicate. Use more words than you think you need. Explain stuff in more detail than you think you need. And also, communication is a two-way street. So ask more questions and listen, and give the people you're working with more time to explain what they're thinking, because all those other soft ways of getting information, of sort of like even like bitching, complaining about your work, is a form of communication. And that's gone too. It'll show up in other ways, right? But it's not going to be as natural, and it's now on the record, right? There's no like casual conversation where you say something, like everything's on the record. So people change their behavior. It's a weird thing, but if you work in a very contentious environment, that's a real thing to think about. So just make sure you're over communicating, which means both talking and listening. And I think that will really help in a lot of team environments. So I don't want to ramble for too long here. Those are the main things. I'm happy to answer specific questions. And like I said, there's lots of articles and lots of talks of how to deal with it in the immediate future. You will find endless examples of how to set up your desk and set up a private space and separate your work from your life. And 90% of the time, those are all still true and accurate. You're likely past that point. You've likely already spent this past week sort of fiddling around to figure out what works for you. So now it's about, what does the next 2 or 3 weeks look like when this starts settling in and it starts getting monotonous. So yeah. I'll stop there and take any questions that are coming in, or any sort of topics you want me to touch on more.
You talked a bit about what generally setting up, figuring out what pattern works for you, but would you be able to give us some sort of specific sort of examples for some people that might need some ideas of what those patterns might look like in terms of maybe a morning routine activities that kind of gets you into a mindset to work for the day? Yeah,
for sure. I'll talk about mine, and I'll talk about some others that are very common. There's certain things that you can sort of do that always kind of work. There's certain things that are in your day that are immutable. You will probably have a breakfast. You will have a lunch. There's certain things you have to do. And so at least for me, I make coffee, I make breakfast every morning. I'm okay with monotony, obviously. So I make pretty much the same breakfast and the same coffee most days. I'm fine with that. I don't have that in a constant need for change. So I'll make a coffee, make a breakfast. I'll come down, and usually for me, I have a rough plan of what my day is going to look like, and I don't map it out to the hour even. I say, you know what, this is the thing I'm going to get solved in the morning, and this thing I'm going to solve in the afternoon. And the reason I frame it that way is, and especially running a company that works remotely, you really take for granted how much you have to trust people. I do not know on a day-to-day what my staff is doing. I really don't. I have to be comfortable with that. And a lot of people, if you're someone managing a team right now, you got to suck that up. You have to come to terms with that reality. You do not know what they're doing every day, and trying to pin that down will not work. So there's an inherent trust and there's inherent freedom that's there. And so that continues. So during the day, during the daytime, during the morning, there's one thing I kind of want to deal with. Sometimes that thing takes me 10 minutes and then I pick a next thing. But I generally don't have, okay, it's 1 hour for this, 1 hour for that. Because usually you can't map it out that much. For me, I do a lot of project management and a lot of web programming. So problems are a little harder to sort out. That may vary for your job. And that may vary who you're working for, what you're working on. But you kind of want to map out like, okay, this is what I'm doing for the morning, this is what I'm doing for the afternoon. Some people can really deal with having a variable lunch. I'm one of those people. If I'm hungry, I can keep on working for another hour or two if I'm still hungry, and it doesn't really bother me. So I will work until 1 o'clock sometimes, and it's fine. There are people who hit 11:55, their stomach grumbles, and then they're useless, and they need to just go eat. So if you're one of those people, then you need to enforce that, because trying to force through it won't work. You'll just be very ineffective. And one of the biggest benefits of having this freedom is that you essentially have that control. Unless you're stuck on a call or something of that nature in large organizations, you have that freedom. So you should take advantage of it. So I tend to notch out, okay, one thing in the morning, one thing in the afternoon. When it was my regular routine, my wife would come home from work after a certain amount of time. So there's a natural end to the day. That doesn't exist anymore, but I still notch out that time. I'm in my office. I have my own office at home, so I have that area notched out for me. I don't do a lot of work from my laptop. That's not something that works well for me. A lot of people are working from a laptop. I have a full desk and like all the nerdy things you can possibly imagine. I have it all. So people who are working from sort of a laptop might want to go and pick a spot. And pick 2 different spots, right? Hopefully in a couple of weeks, if we are still in this scenario, people might start working from their patio, right? All of a sudden, life gets a little bit easier in quarantine if everyone can just be in the sun and work from their patio, okay? But for some people, that just won't work. You manage your distractions however you want. There's just more of them, but everyone has a phone with internet, so we're actually quite accustomed to dealing with distractions. It's actually less of a problem than you think. Everyone has notifications and Instagram and Twitter and whatever else on their phone anyways. We're a very well-conditioned society to deal with distractions while we're doing stuff. The problem is your distractions are new now, okay? And that's what you have to get used to is the change there. And so I think those are the kind of routines that I notched out, is like breakfast, tackle something in the morning. Sometimes it's my whole day, sometimes it's multiple days, but I still treat them as morning, afternoon, morning, afternoon. I try not to work evenings for me. I find that certain types of work are better. So I am more methodical in the morning and more creative in the afternoon. So because I balance different times of work, I will do really intensive web programming and technical stuff in the morning. I will do scoping, documentation, proposal writing in the afternoon, because that's how I know. I guess the afternoon, I am not thinking critically in the same way that I am in the morning, right? There are some people who just don't do well in the morning, in which case, hey, start at 10, finish at 6. That will happen. There is an inherent, as people do this for long periods of time, the responses will stretch. Things will get either earlier in the morning or later in the afternoon. It will happen because people have this freedom, and as they start exercising it more and more, it becomes more normal. So for us, for example, we let people, if they want to work earlier or later, have to schedule themselves. That's been there from the beginning. And so we say, you know what, but between like 10 a.m. and like 2 p.m., we expect you to respond reasonably well if you're on, right? So we want you to be responding between 10 and 2 normally, right? You know, maybe there's a lunch break in there or whatever. And the reason being is we don't want to let things lapse more than one day. If you're working evenings and I'm working mornings, we never actually line up on a conversation together. That gets old after a couple of days, right? So those are the kind of patterns and habits that you sort of identify will work for you and take advantage of it, right? And don't force, if you can, don't force yourself to sit at your computer because you said you're supposed to be at a computer. You're not in an office unless your boss is telling you need to be at this computer, in which case what they don't realize, you can just be at the computer and not be working. They just don't know, right? They're just causing strife for no reason. So yeah, try to figure out the pattern that works for you because I think that will help the most.
My question is,
You don't have to unvolume, you have to unmute.
oh, it is.
Yeah, don't touch your volume.
Okay.
Don't worry,
So
everyone else in the world figuring out how Zoom works too. You're not alone.
we will be Zoom experts
We are,
very
yeah.
soon. We're still learning. My question is, if obviously people that aren't used to something like this, if they're just in their head mentally like going crazy working from home, what are some tips for you to just like kind of alleviate that, or just I don't know, to not to change it up and make them feel more comfortable in a way?
Yeah, you know, and everyone's going to go a little stir crazy, and it's not just totally related to work.
Yeah.
In that case, I would say most of the things that people are recommending out there now still apply. It just don't feel guilty about doing them when you think it's best, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, there's a lot of people. I only use workout classes, for example, right? So, another great like the community gym, great example, right? They're doing a bunch of online things every day, and you can just follow along.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in the middle of your workday and you find that by noon you're stir crazy and you're going to do this anyways, unless there's a reason not to, you should do the workout at noon. You should eat your lunch at 1, and you should get back to work at 2. Okay? There's nothing wrong with that. And so much of this is absolving yourself of the guilt of feeling that you should be doing this, that, or the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you are more productive by doing a half an hour workout or an hour-long workout in the middle of the day and then eating your lunch afterwards, you know, and other weird patterns like I took a shower at like 12, right? 12:30. You can do that now. And that just wasn't a possibility before.
Right.
And so for some people, that's their break. My lunch break is my lunch break almost every day is I will put on a TV show that is 43 minutes long. I will watch that TV show while eating my lunch, and then I go back to work. Sometimes I do my shower in the afternoon because I find in the morning, I want to get up, I want to work, I want to do my stuff. And then my midday break is the stuff a lot of people normally do in their morning.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can take that freedom, and you should take advantage of that, because for me, that's a break. That's a chance to stop what I was doing before and then start something new. Okay. The reason I started doing a random 43-minute episode, which is like if you remove all the commercials, is because it was a good timer, right? Yeah. If you don't start a movie at lunchtime. That's a really bad idea. That's not relaxing. That's procrastinating. Okay. So yeah, you know, if normally it was yoga for you that calms you, great. You might find that what used to work, if you were in a very stressful, busy environment, and then you would go to yoga because yoga was calming, you might not find it works anymore because you're currently in a very calm and desolate, quiet environment. You might not want yoga. You might want like a really aggressive, high intensity workout because it's the opposite of what you have.
Yeah.
And getting stir crazy isn't about I need to move or I need to be still. It's about I need to change what I'm doing because there's too much monotony in my day. And so breaking the pattern means doing the opposite of what's currently bothering you. For most people, if you actually work by yourself at home and there's like, I don't have any kids, there's no one running around right now, this is very calm. And so normally for me, I would go out. I would go out to a lounge. I'd go out with friends. I'd go have a drink. I'd do something social. And for me, my breaks still have to be that. I would end up going to quite a bit of spin classes for quite a while. And I would go in the middle of the day if I could. Because for me, that's what I needed. It was like a nightclub that was exercise. So it worked for me, right? Because it broke the monotony of what was a very calm, long day at home.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to break that pattern, it doesn't, what worked before might not work now because the environment you're in and what's currently like creeping you out or bothering you has changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually is a good point. Didn't think about it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, and so that's so much of it is trying to figure out, you know, what works in your case. And so there's endless advice, and you should totally read it, especially if you're stuck in a position when you know you can't get away for whatever reason, and that can mean any number of things. But yeah, like 2 of my staff have little kids at home, and 3 of us don't, and so our environments are fundamentally different, right? There's a loud toddler running around the whole time. You might still want to do some yoga because it's still peace and quiet. The problem is right now you might not be able to find a space to do that calmly unless you know put in some earbuds that has calming music or whatever it may be, and that's finding a rhythm with you and whoever else is in your house. If you're actually by yourself and you're like in an apartment by yourself and then the loneliness is real, then like do virtual chats, virtual brunches, do all those kind of things. Join, I think Table Space has like a daily sort of chat for as a 10 a.m. Is that correct?
Yeah, 10 a.m. every day.
Right. So that's a great thing to join because just half an hour of seeing faces. Because you know when my team gets together and we do a chat and we do our weekly chat. Actually, I thought about those for a bit. We actually don't do video because we're so used to being at home. We're like, no, we don't need to see each other. It's fine, right? We did a video chat for a client this afternoon. It was very weird seeing my staff's face because we just actually don't even do video chats all that often.
Yeah.
So I'll talk a little. Actually, I'm going to talk really briefly. For anyone working in a team, one of the most important things is called a weekly stand-up meeting. So what happens is, and we do this and it's set in stone, and it's hell or high water if you ever try to move it or change it. For us, every Monday at 10 a.m. there is a call. Everyone gets on the call. We do not schedule meetings over top of it. People try to book it. It is really important. And that call is not to have conversations about what's going on. The weekly stand-up is there to simply identify 2 things. You go around the table and everyone says what they did last week. No context, no sort of describing in super detail, no sort of asking questions. Just here's what my last week looked like. And here's what I'm planning on doing this week. And that's all the roundtable is. We can do it in 20 minutes and I'm talking half the time because I tend to drive conversations a bit more. Obviously, I'm a talker, if you haven't guessed. So in that scenario, it's literally, you just say what you did and what you're going to do. And everyone goes around the table and does that. That is the meeting, okay? If there is any sort of planning or aggressive discussions that should happen about a project or any sort of details and any question that isn't pretty much a yes, no, or really quick, that's not for that. We can do it afterwards. We can stay on the line afterwards. Sometimes it happens, okay? Let's talk about that afterwards. And then particularly for large teams, it has to be aggressively enforced. If you're the person at top, you have to be vicious about it because the whole point is for everyone just to get a concept of what everyone else is doing. And what that does is just brings everyone back on the same page. Oh, that's what you're working on. Okay, that's what you're planning to work on, right? Someone says, hey, I'm working on this thing for this week, and that involves your life, and you had no idea that was going to happen. You've just addressed something before it happens, okay? And so if you're a part of a team, I cannot stress the importance of that. And you pick the same time and place. There's no discussion. There's, ooh, when's that meeting happening? It's every Monday, 10 a.m. You just get on the call. It's the same chat room every week for Google Hangouts for us, right? It's like, yep, you just join there, we talk, everyone knows what the pattern is, and you're done, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That kind of consistency and basic update really does help.
Yeah.
Brings everyone back on the same page.
Okay, well, that was great. Thank you so much for all those tips. I don't think we have any other questions, but if you want to kind of say your contact information afterwards, then if people have any other questions for the recording, then they could reach out.
Sure. Yeah. So it's Paulo Fernandes with Luscious Orange. You can reach me on Twitter, Instagram. If you want to email me, it's paulo@lusciousorange.com. And yeah, I've been offering up this help to anyone who's having a hard time dealing with it. And yeah, we do it all the time, so we're quite used to it. But happy to help.
Thanks so much, Paulo.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Bye.